You never know when inspiration is going to hit. And it happened that one day I accidentally fell into a webcam that was operated by the New York Times. And it showed a pair of red-tailed hawks nesting at NYU on the 12th floor of the library there. I just got caught up in watching this pair as they incubated the eggs, as they hatched, as the young ones, the chicks came out. It was so moving. And I thought, this just, oh, I've got to write about this. And I started making notes, and that's how it began. Daisy was a falcon who on her first flight in the wild crashed into a skyscraper, and she ends up in the animal shelter where Allison takes care of her. She's a peregrine falcon. Peregrine means pilgrim or wanderer, and so many of the characters in the story are like that. They literally move around a lot, spiritually, emotionally. Their lives are full of wanderings and full of pilgrimages, if you like. So Daisy becomes something that draws everyone together and brings out their humanity. I had to do a lot of research to learn about taking care of falcons because I didn't know the first thing about it. So I went to Marsh Conservation Area, which is about an hour's drive north of Toronto, and they have a program there, sort of a raptor experience, where you can meet a hawk or a falcon or whatever birds are available that day, and you can feed them, and best of all, you get to walk the hawk. I thought, this is the most mysterious creature. Here he had these beautiful eyes. He'd look right into my eyes. I knew he knew that I was there. Everything about him was so beautifully evolved for hunting and reproduction and eating and all that kind of stuff. But he was mysterious. There was a feeling that there was a mystery in front of me that I would never understand. And I was fascinated by that. And he was so beautiful. Boston, October 5th, 2010. I remember that I was about to turn 8 years old, and my mother, small and quick as a kestrel in flight, was taking off with her colleague Lucien for a photo shoot in Quebec. She was going to miss my birthday, and knowing this, I wept. "Sweetheart, don't cry," she said. "When I come back, we'll have a big party." Dad didn't try to stop Mom. Instead, he promised to take me birding for my birthday. He pulled out his handkerchief and dried my eyes. He loved to sit with me, sharing his books full of grand, extravagant birds of prey, the peregrine, the great horned owl, the red-tailed hawk. Having once been a falconer, he still yearned to fly these sparks of light. And he would speak to me with joy about each of these magnificent birds. But I would see only talons and claws and feel the blood, the torn flesh of absence, numb with disappointment at my mother's indifference. Yet because of her flight, I wanted to be close to my father. I wanted to fly to retrieve her. And so I sat with him and gazed at the raptors, the circle of light they drew around my one loving parent, so that the fierce enormity of these creatures didn't matter. What mattered was that in my father's generous heart, there was room for myself and the great hawks both. Haggards, he called the grown-up hawks, their special name. He talked to me about them, compared them to tiny songbirds, showed me pictures of red-tailed hawks, how tender they were as they fed their chicks. A hawk chick is called an eyas, he said. Why? I don't know, sweetheart. It's just an old word. Eyas. The fluffy hawklets had a name all their own, which meant they were beloved creatures. And so I let the word loose in my mind as I reached out and touched the baby bird on the page. I imagined that I was smoothing the feathers of the mother hawk, patting the little ones, and then I closed my eyes and slipped underneath the haggard's wing, as if I too were an eyas, gifted with a special name, a slight creature of wind and air, helpless, unable to fly. On my 8th birthday, we drove to a beautiful location, Golden Willow Conservation Area, just a 10-minute drive north of Toronto. Raptor Experience, said the sign, and I imagined a nest, a great mother hawk, her pale breast feathers tipped with amber light, and her tiny eyases, mouths open, waiting for her to feed them. I was going to see this, experience it. What I did not see was the look of consternation on the guide's face. "She knows a lot about birds," Dad said to the guide. She's very mature for her age. At the edge of a field, there were several raptors, tethered and placed on pedestals, identified as a peregrine falcon, a red-tailed hawk, a harrier, and a kestrel. These are birds of prey, explained the guide. For centuries, men have trained them to hunt, and our birds are also trained to hunt for you. And they will come to you for food. I looked around, but saw no nests. Flying the birds was only for those with prior experience in falconry. Are there any falconers here? Asked the guide. My father's eyes flashed blue fire. He raised his hand. I watched. She'll fly to a nest, said my nerves, my bones. On his gloved fist sat an enormous red-tailed hawk named Princess. When he removed her hood, I could see that she had dark eyes, sunlight etching her brown-winged feathers, a proud and regal stance. She doesn't like me, I thought. I watched my dad, his hands alive to the memory of the falcon he'd once trained, as he learned again how to hold, attach, and release the tethers. He seemed not to notice me, to be in awe of Princess, to be as still as a rabbit about to be devoured. Then he let Princess go free, a rustle of feathers, an extraordinary flapping of dappled wings, the spread of her great red tail, and with the jingling of her tiny bell, she glided away, soaring above the treetops. Is she going to her nest? I asked. She's going to hunt, he said. I want to see her nest, I whispered. My dad did not respond. He was rapt, attending to the hawk, as if Princess were all that mattered to him. I watched with disappointment as the great hawk circled the sky, as two other participants released their birds. It was too much for me, this huge hawk eclipsing the sun, casting its shadow on my father, incoming hawks and falcons swooping overhead, returning to their falconers. Way to go, Princess, Dad said. When are we going to see her nest? She hasn't got a nest. But that's what I wanted to see. I was close to tears. It was my birthday after all. And as I glanced at the enormous hawk, who now seemed a monstrous creature, cruel and dangerous. At the sound of her name, she came soaring toward Dad's glove with a confident beating and folding of her enormous wings, casting light into shadow all around her. In her huge talons, she was carrying the ripped and bloodied carcass of a dead squirrel. The poor thing, its stomach torn open, its entrails dangling like disgusting little red balloons. Smacked with a wave of nausea, I threw up. This was supposed to be a special treat, and I had hoped to see hawk babies. Instead, horrible Princess went and killed a squirrel and made me sick to my stomach. This is how I tell the story now, knowing that I was much too young to put words to all my complicated feelings. It felt as if the earth itself had stopped breathing. I couldn't comprehend Princess, her strange, enormous eyes, the sharp curve of her beak and her talons clutching prey, the commanding stance of her broad wings and tail. It was too fearsome, far too strange for me. I'd wanted to see a nest, to look at the fluffy irises, warmed by the comfort of a red-tailed hawk, her large and generous body. There wasn't any comfort to be had. I threw up some more, and I wept. My father had to clean me up and apologize to everyone. I can remember how upset the adults looked, except for a woman who knelt down beside me, put an arm around me, and dried my eyes. Don't be afraid, honey, she said, casting a glance at my dad, which I knew even then meant, what kind of an idiot brings an 8-year-old to a falconry run? Yet I felt sure they were angry at me, a big girl throwing up and crying like that. I felt ashamed, yet I couldn't help myself. It was my birthday. The big hawk didn't have babies. She was a savage killer, and she was going to hurt me too. The guide approached us. I'm going to have to ask you to leave, he said to my dad. She's really too young to understand this, and it's upsetting the others. My father apologized again for my behavior. As we were leaving, I overheard one guide speaking to another. Just a poor little kid, scared of the hawk. I started crying again. In the car, Dad told me he was sorry I'd been scared. Honey, she wouldn't hurt you. I wanted to see her nest. I thought we were going to see the irises, like in the book. My dad was silent for a moment. I should have told you, he said at last. She doesn't have a nest, hon. She's a special bird. All birds have nests. I guess you're disappointed, he said at last. I told him the hawks were too big, that I only liked small birds. Maybe when you're older, he said. No, only small birds. On the way home, Dad tried to explain that Princess was bred in captivity, that she didn't need a nest, that she had her own special beauty. She scared me. She's a mean hawk and I hate her. I don't care. That's it.